recording studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, Jody. I am doing okay.
Just okay, huh?
A little worn out, but
worn out.
I'm a pro. I'll try to rise above.
Rise above. You know what that makes me think of?
What's that?
Spinal Tap. The scene where they're in the green room there, it's they're getting ready to go on and do their show, and they're doing this thing, and he's talking to his manager and saying, I don't like this. It's something about the green room food, and he's having trouble with it. And he's having this whole issue of like, the food is not up to snuff for what he wants to be a professional. And the manager's hoping that it's not going to be an issue. And he's like, no, I'm a professional. I will rise above.
Right. It's the whole bread folding
the bread
incident,
folding
right?
thing. And he's like, well, why would you fold the bread? And it's like, the manager's like, well, you don't fold the bread. You'd fold the meat. It's like, but I don't want folded meat.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good, that's just an awesome movie. Awesome movie. I was telling, as a matter of fact, one of my students about that movie. He hadn't seen it. He's a younger cat. And
that's like required watching for anybody that wants to be an actual musician.
That's what I said. You have to go take some time and watch it and report back. And,
have you heard the report back yet?
Not yet.
No.
Got to give him a little time. But
well, how much time do you need in quarantine?
This is true. So I should call him and go, hey, did you watch that movie yet?
Yeah. Take 2 hours, damn it. Just get it done.
Right. Yeah. No, there's so many great lines in that, where, they were still booing him when we went on stage.
We had to apologize with our set.
Right. Yeah. It was awesome. Kind of what we should do with the intro to this podcast. But
you want to apologize?
No,
just
but
sit
I
here
am
like
going
it
to
was
save
not
it.
my set.
I'm gonna save it right now.
Oh, okay.
Because there is a scene in Spinal Tap when they're in the recording studio and they're tracking guitars at the same time, and he keeps messing up. And what are they doing? They're layering guitars. And
yes,
that's what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, well, how about them apples? We're talking about how to layer guitars when we're tracking to get a fuller sound, and this is going to be a 4-part.
Yes,
4-part. That was 8. This is 4. Or this is 4, and that was 4, and that was 8. So I'm going to go back and forth. It's 4 parts. Part 1 is today.
Yes.
Yes.
So this will be, like you said, a 4-part thing. It will go into more meat as we go along. But today we're talking about layering guitars and why would we do that.
So why would we? Well, you know what? That's a good question. Why would we layer guitars? Why would you do that?
I will tell you why I would do that right now. No,
Can I prod the bear? Poke.
Yeah. No, the main reason I think one would do that is to create a fuller sound or width. So the typical part would be maybe, say if you got like a rock track, you might have just the same part performed twice, left and right, just to create a bigger, fuller sound. So, having more impact essentially of that.
That's the hope anyway.
That is the hope. Yeah. If you're doing it right. So yeah, doing that, or could be also inside parts. Let's say that you've double tracked or triple tracked or whatever you've done with the same performance, the same part. If you also want certain parts to stick out more, let's say it's a part of a riff that you want to really kind of leap out. Maybe just overdubbing that with a different guitar or a different amp setting or something like that. So layering stuff to create this big wall of sound.
Big wall of sound.
Yeah.
Big wall. Big.
Yeah.
Big.
Big. Much like that dog that just barked somewhere. I don't know if it was my end or yours. But yeah. So that's how I would do it. And one thing to point out here when we're talking about tracking it again, right? We don't want to just duplicate the track, because then you get essentially just a big mono signal of that, right? No matter. So you want those slightly different things.
That sounded really odd for you to say that it was a big mono signal. Is it really a big mono signal?
Big mono sound.
Or is it just mono?
Yeah, well, I
It's
mean,
more of mono.
it's more, yeah, it's stereo and mono and more mono.
That's right.
Um, yeah, no, but instead, if you're don't just duplicate the part because that will not have the same impact. You need to retrack it because it's those slight differences that tend to make it bigger and thicker and juicier and harder or all of those kind of
I think I'm
euphemisms.
gonna leave that to you.
Let's maybe let's move ahead perhaps. But that would be um, one reason why I would layer guitars to kind of get that bigger impact.
Bigger impact, make it fuller
Yeah.
is what you're saying. You
Yeah.
you approached by saying making it bigger with mono, but maybe it's mono. It's not mono if you don't copy and paste. You play it twice, it becomes bigger sounding, hopefully because of the slight discrepancies in your playing and everything else that's going on.
Correct.
Yes.
And we're talking slight discrepancies.
Slight discrepancies.
Yeah.
You get a
You wanna
micrometer out to measure that, or how are you doing that?
Yes, super anal with it. No, but if it starts sounding too much like, oh, this is really two different parts, then it's not close enough, right? So if let's say that you're a really sloppy player, you might have a hard time doing that. So you want to make sure that you can play the same thing, and it's still slight, just could be different pick attack or anything like that at a certain part, but it needs to be the same but different.
Same but different.
Yeah. Um, how's that for an explanation?
I'm sorry. That just, yeah, same but different.
I told you I'm worn out. So
Yes.
no.
That just made my brain go, whoo.
Yeah,
All right.
I hear you.
So, but essentially, when you're adding another track, you're getting more of something, and more is more.
More is more.
More is more. More is not
Yeah.
like less is not necessarily more, because less is less and more is more. And my favorite
is never
person to
more.
have ever experienced saying something of that nature, or he didn't
Yes.
experience, he said it. It was the drummer from Rush, who is now unfortunately no longer on this planet, but Neil Peart, who infamously said in some interview somewhere, and I'm sure he said it more than once, but the interview that I saw, it was kind of funny. He's like,
Yeah.
all those people that go out there saying that less is more. Well, no, less is less, more is more. And it's whether it's required, if the part needs more, then you give it more. If it doesn't need more, then you don't give it more.
Sure.
That was
Sure.
the understanding I took away from it anyway.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. More is definitely more, but not always better.
That's another good way of saying it. And the less is not always better. So
Right.
it serve the song.
That's right.
That's the whole
That's right.
concept here for producers and artists and everything. Make sure you're serving the song.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's
that's the whole idea, right? So
Yeah.
if you're dealing with, let's say we're talking guitars obviously today, so we're assuming we're talking about guitar heavy kind
And
of
we're also
music here.
talking about layering those guitars, which means more guitars.
Yeah. Top of each other, like a layer cake.
Mm.
Make it nice and big and tasty.
All right.
Yeah. I cracked you up with that one, huh?
Yeah, you sure did.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll
worries.
try to continue with the script here.
Right on.
But no, so we did that. So, and one thing also, you can add like a little bit of definition. I'm not sure if I touched on that yet, but
No, you haven't. And I'm looking at that and going, okay, how do you get definition by adding more guitars?
well, to have something played on top of that, that could be, let's say that you have two really fuzzed out guitars, hard left and right. Sounds great in isolation perhaps, but could get a little bit buried once you get it into the mix. So if you add the same part again, possibly, but with a little bit of a cleaner tone, perhaps even an acoustic guitar or completely clean guitar, to layer that again can add more of that definition. It's very similar to the concept that we talked about when tracking bass guitar or acoustic guitar, how sort of having that DI can help bring out certain parts that can get a little lost in the mix. So adding a clean tone and just kind of sneaking that in.
Sneaking it in.
Sneaking
That's
it in.
under
So-
the mix portion of things, but you need to have a track of it in order to be able to do that.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I mean by, I think, definition. And it could also be a part where you're adding, let's say it's the same note or the same chord, but you might be playing it an octave higher
Mm.
to just kind of make that pop a little bit as well and kind of blending those. So that's sort of straddling that mix issue there. But like you said, you got to have the part first before
Yes.
you can do that.
Yes,
So
you do.
we're double or possibly even triple tracking guitars. I remember reading a story with Scott Ian from Anthrax, and
Mm.
this is around, well, mid to late 90s, and I want to say it was either their Stomp 442 or Volume 8 album, but it's that late 90s era where he was telling a story, and I do think I have this right, where they not only tripled, but they tripled the parts, but in stereo as well. So they had 3 different amps playing the same parts, hard left and hard right,
That's
just to
like
kind of create that massive
six.
sound.
Six.
That's 6, yeah.
6 different times. No, so did they play it 6 different times, or did they play it once on each side and used 3 different amps on the same guitar signal?
No, I believe they tracked it 6 times.
So they put in the work.
They certainly put in the work on that one, yeah.
Mm.
But if you listen to that album as well, it's like that's just massive guitar sound.
You know,
And yeah, so
I think that was also Zach's thing. I don't remember. I think Zach Wild, that is, when he was working in the early days of his working with Ozzy, he quadruple tracked everything.
yeah.
So it's not quite the same as triple tracked on one side, triple tracked on the other. He's just doing quad tracks. Maybe it's more, I don't know. But that was my understanding, is that was how he did a lot of the things when he was working. Well, I guess maybe he's still working with Ozzy on some occasion. I don't know. Yeah,
but
hey,
it's the same
Zach,
concept.
if you're out
right?
there and you want to answer that question, inquiring
know.
minds want to know.
If I bump into him, I'll ask the question.
That's right. You're not far from him.
Yeah, I bump into him every once in a while. But yeah, hey, name drop. Yeah.
Boing.
Yeah. Al Pacino told me to never name drop, right?
Well done, you.
Yeah, right. No, but the concept there is, again, to create a bigger sound by just playing the same thing again. It's much the same as, people singing in a choir, I guess, right? You have 2 people, it can sound great. If you have 4 or more, there's just more, bigger sounding, and very similar effect. So that is a very effective way of layering guitar, and probably the most common way of I think, layering guitars, when we're thinking about the same part or just doing it again with a slightly different amp or something like that.
Do it again. Do it again. Yeah. Do it again.
Yes.
Do it again. That's what you're going to hear a lot of coming out of your mouth as a producer. Do it again. Do it again.
Yeah. What do they call it? The Mutt Lang train thing. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Yeah.
So I guess that's a good train to be on. He's done some pretty awesome work.
Yeah. Has he ever done anything that hasn't been awesome?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Mutt, if you're out there, would you like to tell us?
Yeah. Given how reclusive he is, probably not.
Probably not. But, and speaking about the concept of maybe working like a Mutt Lang, I'm going to guess that he spends a lot of time planning things out, which is kind of a segue of getting into the next section of what we're going to start talking about. But before we actually get into planning it out, we're going to plan to have a word from our sponsors right now. So, planning it out.
Yes. We don't just go in there and just start recording.
You don't want to just go doing willy-nilly?
You could, but you're probably going to end up wasting a lot of studio time. So from my point of view...
Well, why wouldn't you want to waste a lot of studio time? There's bands that have done it.
This is true. And I'm guessing they probably have the budget to do it too, though.
Well, there's always that. Budget is a big consideration.
Right. And today, probably not. But I still think I'm a big believer in trying to be as organized as possible. For me, it helps me get the job done, and it helps me to stay focused and not lose track of what it is. And as we always
having
like
a
to
good
say,
roadmap is what you're saying.
Something like that, right? Where, and as we always like to say, we want to serve the song. So I think if you start going too crazy, you can lose track of that, and you're doing yourself and, more importantly, the song a disservice by not sort of sticking to that.
Would you be doing the artist a disservice by not doing that? Because as
Most
a
definitely.
producer,
Yeah, if I'm sort of like a third party producer type of thing.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and this goes back a little bit to other conversations where we've had, but that's hopefully a discussion you've had with a band beforehand, right? How they see their sound and how you can help them fulfill that. And that could be, a specific workflow that you might have that think you're going to suit that, whether it's massive layerings of guitar or perhaps not doing that. It can be, when you think layering, or at least when I'm thinking layering, even it's essentially just kind of playing something more than once, right? And even in a very sparse thing, like maybe like an AC/DC thing, where you have Angus on one side and Malcolm on the other, and together, even if they're playing the same stuff, it sounds really, really big because they got the differences in tone and all this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, so I think having that sort of like mindset when you're going in and trying to shoot for that.
It's almost like having the ingredients as if you had a recipe.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of something Dave Pensato said at one point in one of his In the Layer moments, or it was one of the interview. But
what
he's
did Dave say?
Dave said something very akin to what you were touching upon there. It's like if you're a chef and you're walking into the kitchen, you have an idea what it is that you're going to make. You just don't start throwing ingredients into the pot and hoping something decent comes out.
Well, that's usually a good way of getting things done, having a good idea of what you want to do.
Yeah. And I think the same analogy works for, going into the studio when you have, okay, this is what we're going to try to do, and this is the way we're going to do it, and sort of staying on point there.
Yes.
And another thing that can happen is if you start throwing stuff out and just trying, like, let's try this, or let's try to do that, it can be very easy to get married to parts that ultimately don't serve the song.
Or don't work in the general sense of the song too.
Right. Yeah. And it could be something like, I had this awesome melody going on there. Yeah, that's great, but it clashes with the vocal.
Something else. Which,
so
speaking of which, married guitar parts and whatnot, it reminds me of a audition that I did a bunch of years ago for a band called Evan and Jaron. And I was given their material prior to having to go out of town on a trip. And they were scheduling people for like the following day kind of thing. And it was like, they're going to be doing some more auditions and we'll schedule you when you get back. So I knew I was going to be cutting my trip just a little bit short to get back in order to do this audition, because they had suddenly like hit the big time. They had a couple of songs in some movies. They were suddenly like going stratospheric with some of their songs, and they were going to go out, do some shows, and needed a guitar player and whatnot. So a buddy of mine that worked at their label gave me the material so that I would at least have it on my trip out of town. I could hear it. I could get it under my brain synapses so that when I got back to a guitar, I could hopefully be able to play it without too much trouble. Yeah. So I get back into town. I've learned these guitar parts that I had on the material that was given to me. I go in, I do this audition, I nail the shit out of it. And I can't remember if it was Evan or if it was Jaron, but one of the two of them, when we get done, turns to me, he goes, "Man, that was just really beautiful guitar playing. But where did you learn those guitar parts?" And I'm like suddenly going, it was on the material that I was given. Yeah, but that wasn't the stuff that went out to all the people for the auditions, and it's not the stuff on the actual record. Where did you get this? And I'm like, I'm not about to throw my buddy under the bus who worked at the label. So I was just like, it was on the material that was given to me. And I don't know, it was just given to me. It was sent to me by messenger. I don't know who gave it to me. I was lying my ass off, but by the same token, they weren't married to those parts because they obviously didn't make it into the recorded versions that went out into the films and into radio and everything else. They just happened to be, I happened to have a pre-release version of whatever it was that they did that had the parts on there. So yeah, That's a good example of like not being married to parts.
That's funny. That's
And
funny.
of
Yeah.
course, it didn't net me the gig because obviously they were very concerned as to why I had something that was not released.
Right. Yeah. No, but that is a good lesson though, because even if you're, at the writing stages and you're hearing something, and sometimes you get that, what I like to call like demo-itis, like you just used to hearing the same thing all the time, that when something goes on, even if it's ultimately better,
It's
you
almost
have a
like
hard time
tennis
adjusting
elbow.
to.
It's something you don't want.
Yeah. But is
Demo-itis. Don't get it.
right? Yeah, don't get it. It's contagious and it takes a while to get rid of. But it is important to sort of have that fresh perspective. So even if that's, and I remember this, when I was younger, and I think we've always done this, when that's your only, it's like creative contribution to the track. It's like, oh no, but that was my favorite part. I played that D minor 7. It was awesome.
It was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, but
Too
the
bad.
singer's
Doesn't work
singing
for
that
the
F
song.
sharp on top of that, so it doesn't work. So yeah. But you kind of learn how to kind of, let the ego subside and let the
One would
song
hope.
carry. Yeah.
One would hope.
Yeah, absolutely. There was another story that reminds me of what you were telling me there. It was another, I'm going to try not put so many names in here, but let's say a famous, mix engineer was telling the story and had delivered a mix, and the producer came back and said, well, where's this part? Well, it didn't work in the mix. Well, it's my favorite part. Okay, I'll make you a whole tape with just that part and you can listen to it because it's not working in the song. So, yeah, don't get too attached to parts, because it's the song that's ruling and not your ego.
Yes,
So,
the song matters,
yeah.
not your head, unless you're
Right.
Prince.
Well,
And then his ego is actually kind of matching most of his song work. So
yeah, but yeah, Prince could do whatever the hell he wants, right? Because it's just going to be awesome anyway. So, yeah, don't argue with Prince. Well, tough today, but you get the point. Yeah.
not without some serious smelling salts and a shovel.
Right. Yeah. Really. Yeah. Bada boom. Come for the info, stay for the bad jokes.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, so that leads us into sort of like the third part of this podcast, where we're talking about a lot of this kind of comes into arrangement of the
Yes.
song.
The arrangement
Right.
of the song is actually a good way to serve the song.
Yeah.
Do they really? I
And-
mean, because there was a point in time in history in music, in the music business, when arrangers were a big deal.
Yeah.
I wasn't alive for that era, but I'm assuming that there still are arrangers for arranging music.
yeah,
I would
I
think
mean-
that's like their sole job is just to be the arranger. But I think a lot of the time now that probably gets folded into the job of the producer as well.
Yeah, I think so. I
Because I
think
know I
it's
have to do it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it gets sort of baked in with all of that, where, things that used to be like 4 jobs, right? Let's say that the arranger, the producer, the engineer, and the coffee guy, right?
Consolidating. It's the
yeah,
way the industry goes now.
but
Cover it up. Don't do it again.
yeah, but it is a very important part of it to sort of have that where.
The ability to arrange, yes.
Yeah, and so let's just touch on that a little bit before we go into the nitty here of doing that with guitar parts. But when you're talking arrangement, what is that you're referring to when you're talking about arrangement?
It's a combination of how the instruments are going to interact with each other. And if we're talking specifically about guitars, oftentimes if you're using the same guitar with the same amp with the same guitar player, and you have them playing the same thing over and over again, hopefully it's going to be able to be translated to multiple takes of kind of the same thing. But at the same time, it's not really adding a whole lot to the sound because it's a whole lot of the same. Because you're using
Yeah.
the same guitar, you're using the same amp, you're using the same stuff. So it's kind of like, that's not, I mean, it's arranging in a sense, but it's not smart arranging in my mind. And you've
Right.
kind of already touched on it by saying, well, don't copy and paste a track and then split it left and right and hope that it's not going to sound mono in a sense. Because
Right.
essentially all that is just doubling up whatever the is. So for me, arranging, especially if I'm arranging multiple guitar parts, means that I'm going to choose different guitars with different amps to get different sounds to kind of increase the amount of spectrum that's happening from the guitar. That's
Right.
from an arranged standpoint.
Yeah. So it's that I would agree with all of that actually, where it's not only
Well,
making the
that's
song
no
work.
fun. Why don't you disagree with something?
Oh, you're full of shit, Jody, and let me tell you why.
Okay, I'm listening.
No, but I think you're right, and it's not just the arrangement of, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, repeat, bridge, chorus out, that kind of arrangement, but having parts work together to sort of keep the song interesting from downbeat of 1 to the end of the song, right? And it could be like we're talking about layering today, having a different part, but it could also be not being afraid of removing parts, right? So
Yeah. Well, that's that whole idea of not getting married to a part.
Yeah. And
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to divorce this artist from this guitar part.
That's right. No more power chords in the bridge.
That's right.
So, yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of tricks there that we can do, but it could be as simple as changing up a voicing, when you're layering something.
Say you've got a guitar player who's only known for playing in the open position with the open chords, and same with putting a capo on it, but maybe you get them to play the first inversion of a chord instead of the root position and that kind of thing. And if you don't know theory, go find some other podcast that explains that much better.
Yeah. Yeah, we get lonely up here on our pedestals, right? But no, but in all seriousness, this is not what that's about, right? But you're right. It could be, let's say, the only way you know how to play G major is that open G major. But maybe playing it in a different, inversion, like you said, up on the 10th fret, or doing it just with a bar chord instead, or what have you, can just give breadth and width to a sound.
That's right. Use different strings. That's also a concept of being able to get different voicings. So you play the D major on your top 3 strings, and you play it again on the low 3 strings in a different spot that gets you the same sound. It's going to sound different, even though it's the same voicing.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's all those little things, and we keep talking about those 1% here and there, right? But
1%, little bits that add up into the whole lot.
Right. Another thing would be, besides different voicings, would be to do what we've talked about before a little bit, what we call split voicings, right?
Yes.
So you want to explain that a little bit?
Have we really talked about this before?
Well, we have privately, you and I think.
Yeah, privately, certainly. Split voicing. So that's the concept of, like, maybe you're playing a G major 7th chord, and to split it up, you might play the root and the 5th in one guitar and split that to one side. And then you might play the 3rd and the 7th with another guitar and pan it to the other side. And all together, in the giant grand scheme of things, it makes a G major 7th chord. Or you could split the 3rd and the 5th on one and the root and the 7th on another, although that would probably sound really dissonant. But it's the idea of taking the chord apart and only playing pieces of it with one guitar and another set of pieces for it on a second guitar. That's what I would call split voicings when it comes to layering of guitar parts.
Yeah, and that can be a very, very effective way of adding interest to parts as well.
Sure.
If you have, and one thing I like with that kind of idea is also, if you have, let's say if the song is a little bit more of a sparse arrangement, to, instead of just having one guitar playing that, like you said, that G major 7, right? And now you got 2 guitars doing different things. Or you can have one being just a melody note on top and one's doing a power chord and blah, blah, blah. It's just really imagination that puts a limit on that kind of stuff, what we can do. So splitting up chords like that can be a very, very cool thing to do as well.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. And this kind of gives us into another idea. We've talked majority of today with essentially playing the same parts. Right? When we're layering part, we're creating a bigger sound.
Except for the split voicing thing.
Except for the split voicing thing. So we're kind of like easing into this now. But it could also be layering in the sense that we have different parts that create a big hole in there as well. So it could be building off of, you said, with the split voicings, where you could have a part, maybe it's steady eighth note thing going on with a power chord, and you're playing the upper melody notes or something like that with a different guitar. Sometimes rhythmically different and all this kind of stuff as well
Yeah.
to create a really, really busy arrangement that sounds cohesive, right? I was listening earlier on today, actually, one of my favorite bands, Def Leppard, and was listening to especially the Hysteria album, where there's a song all that called Armageddon it.
Yep.
And that's just a case study of what I'm kind of talking about right now. It's like world championship in guitar parts, just like left and right and everywhere.
As if there were an Olympics of guitar playing.
Yeah, because then, again, Mutt Lang there, but
note for note. That's probably,
yeah.
every one of those notes was probably recorded individually.
They did that on a couple of songs. And that was one of those Mutt Lang things where he's like, no, I want this chord to hit all at the same time.
Yeah, no cascading whatsoever.
Yeah, which
Pang.
That's minutia stuff. Right? Where, no, I don't want to hear a pick go across a chord. I want to hear all at the same time. So yeah, but that would be one, case study we can talk about writing different parts and how just create this big whole sound, massive sound.
Well, we'll have to do that in another episode at some point.
Yes,
I think.
But yeah, I think there's not too much more I would like to add to that. I think we covered a lot of the first thing here when we came.
I don't have a whole lot to say to it now. I think we need to cut it here and say, stay tuned for next week when we get into part 2. Well, that's part 4, so let's make that part 2.
There you go.
Of layering
visual
guitars.
Joke.
Watch the YouTube broadcast to get that one.
Yeah, right. All right. Thank you, Jody. That's going to do it for me. Then I will talk to you later.
And to everyone out there inside the recording studio land, thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.